Do you know the feeling of seeing your daughter's face turn pale with fear? I do. 3 strangers in fake police uniforms stood at my door at 6 o'clock in the morning, shouting eviction orders and threatening to drag my family out onto the street. I saw her trembling on the staircase, and something about my wife, something primal and terrifying, exploded. The HOA president Karen had no idea that behind the facade of a gentle housewife was a wild beast ready to tear apart anyone who invaded its den. But her bigger mistake, she never wondered why there were unusual security measures around our backyard, or why certain government vehicles occasionally parked on our street. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below, because this story of how an arrogant HOA president sent fake cops to our home and ended up begging for mercy will forever change how you view true power. Our neighborhood of Pinewood Gardens was once a peaceful middle-class community. That was before Karen Anderson swooped in 3 years ago and turned our homeowners association into her fiefdom. My name is Ryan Taylor. I'm 45, a former software engineer who now works remotely, and I prefer solving problems with logic rather than confrontation. My wife Megan is the warrior in our family, a former military trainer who now works as an independent contractor training SEAL teams and other elite forces. Our 15-year-old daughter, Lily, inherited my tech skills and her mother's tenacity. Looking back, I should have seen the storm coming. But like most storms, it started with just a few dark clouds on the horizon. The first sign came when our elderly neighbor, Margaret Wilson, knocked on our door one evening in early April. Margaret had lived in Pinewood Gardens for over 20 years and kept meticulous records of everything that happened in our community. Ryan, she said, her voice quivering slightly, Karen's making changes to the HOA regulations without proper voting procedures. She's targeting homes that don't fit her vision for the neighborhood. I thanked Margaret for the warning, but didn't think much of it. After all, what could an HOA president really do? As it turns out, with the right amount of arrogance and disregard for rules, quite a lot. The second sign came a week later when Lily discovered online rumors about our family stockpiling weapons and training militia in our backyard. The reality: Megan ran a legitimate training facility with all proper permits obtained years before Karen took over the HOA. She trained military and law enforcement personnel in tactical skills, nothing illegal or threatening about it. But Karen had begun spinning a narrative that we were somehow a danger to the community. I should have taken it more seriously then, but I've always believed that truth eventually prevails over lies. That was my first mistake. The third sign was impossible to ignore. Megan spotted someone photographing her training session through our fence, a stocky man with a military-style haircut whom we later identified as Scott Mitchell, Karen's cousin, and a former security guard fired for abusing his authority. That evening, our security system alerted us to an unauthorized access attempt. Someone had tried to hack into our home security cameras. As a former IT specialist in the military, I knew exactly what to do. I not only blocked the intrusion, but set up a trace that would allow me to monitor any future attempts. When I told Megan about it, her face hardened in a way I hadn't seen since her active duty days. Ryan, she said, her voice calm, but her eyes intense, this isn't just harassment anymore. They're surveilling us, gathering information. We need to prepare. The military strategist in her was awakening, and for the first time, I felt a chill run down my spine, not because of what Karen might do, but because I wondered if I had what it takes to protect my family against someone with power. Megan must have sensed my doubt because she placed her hand on mine and said, "We're in this together. Your brain's my brawn. They don't stand a chance." I nodded, trying to believe her. But that night, as I installed additional security cameras around our property, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was outmatched. Lily approached me the next morning as I was testing the new security system. "Dad," she said, her voice serious beyond her 15 years, "I've been monitoring the neighborhood chat groups. There's something weird happening. 3 other families have gotten violation notices in the past month, all for things that weren't issues before Karen took over." She showed me her tablet where she compiled a list of recent HOA complaints, all targeted longtime residents with modest homes that hadn't undergone expensive renovations. A pattern was emerging, and it made me increasingly uneasy. My daughter had seen it before I did, Karen wasn't just targeting us. She was systematically pressuring certain homeowners. The HOA's first official move against us came in the form of a violation notice citing our backyard training facility for multiple infractions of newly updated regulations on outdoor structures and home-based businesses. The fine, $15,000, due within 30 days, or they would place a lion on our home. I stared at the paper, feeling my heart race with a mixture of anger and anxiety. This was clearly targeted harassment, but the legal language made it look official enough to be concerning. Megan read it over my shoulder and snorted dismissively. "They're fishing," she said. "They know we have all the proper permits. This is just Karen trying to intimidate us into selling." Why would Karen want us out so badly? The answer came from an unexpected source. My old colleague from the city planning department called me out of the blue. "Ryan, thought you should know. There's a major redevelopment plan being discussed for your area. A company called Elite Homes is looking to buy up properties and build luxury condos. They need 75% of homeowners to sell for the plan to go through." Suddenly, Karen's actions made perfect sense. As HOA president, she stood to make a fortune in kickbacks if she could push enough families out to make way for this development. That evening, Megan and I walked around the neighborhood, taking stock of which homes had recently sold and which were displaying for sale signs. In the past 6 months, nearly 30% of the houses had changed hands, all purchased by shell companies that, with some digging, we discovered were subsidiaries of Elite Homes. Our community was being systematically dismantled, and most residents had no idea. "We need to talk to Frank," Megan said, referring to our neighbor Frank Donovan, a former police officer who now ran a private security company. "He's been in law enforcement long enough to know how to investigate this properly." Frank was a burly, soft-spoken man who had moved to Pinewood Gardens after retiring from 20 years on the force. When we shared our suspicions with him, he nodded gravely. "I've been watching Karen for a while now. Something about her never sat right with me. Give me a few days to make some calls and see what I can dig up about her and Elite Homes." Frank's involvement gave me a sense of relief. Finally, someone with real investigative experience was on our side. Little did I know how valuable his help would soon become. Karen's next move was bold. She called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss security concerns in the neighborhood, clearly targeting our home. Megan and I decided to attend, prepared with all our documentation. As we walked into the community center that evening, I felt dozens of eyes turned toward us. Karen sat at the head table, a smug smile playing on her lips as she shuffled through some papers. Next to her was Sophia Blackwell, her loyal vice president and a real estate agent who stood to profit handsomely from the Elite Homes deal. On her other side sat William Porter, the HOA's attorney, a man whose expensive suit suggested he wasn't working for community service. The room was more crowded than usual for an HOA meeting, a testament to Karen's skill at stirring up concern. I recognized many faces: the Johnsons, who had lived across from us for 12 years, the elderly Paddles from the corner house, several young families new to the neighborhood. Some avoided eye contact, while others offered small smiles of encouragement. It struck me then how effectively Karen had divided our once close community. Those who had received violation notices or felt pressured stuck together, while others, fearing they might be next, tried to stay in Karen's good graces. Karen began the meeting with a practiced look of concern. "Fellow homeowners, I've called this emergency session to address growing security fears in our community. It has come to the board's attention that certain residents," her eyes fixed pointedly on us, "are conducting military-style training operations that pose a risk to our peaceful neighborhood." Sophia then clicked a remote, projecting poorly angled, grainy photos of our backyard onto the wall, clearly taken by Scott during his unauthorized surveillance. "As you can see," she continued smoothly, "these activities involve multiple unidentified individuals in tactical gear handling what appear to be training weapons on residential property." The murmurs in the room grew louder. Next to me, Megan sat perfectly still, her face expressionless, but I could feel the tension radiating from her. She had spent 15 years serving her country, and now her patriotism was being twisted into something sinister. I felt my throat go dry as murmurs spread through the room. Public speaking had never been my strong suit, and confrontation made my heart race. But when I glanced at Megan, her encouraging nod gave me strength. I stood up, willing my voice not to shake. "Those photos were taken illegally," I stated, surprised by the steadiness in my tone. "My wife runs a legitimate training business for military and law enforcement personnel, with all proper permits obtained before Ms. Anderson became HOA president." I approached the front table and spread out our documentation: city permits, business license, insurance papers, and safety certifications. Furthermore, I continued, gaining confidence. The new regulations being cited in our violation notice were never properly voted on by the full HOA membership as required by our bylaws. The room fell silent as I laid out our case, pointing out the irregularities in Karen's management of the HOA and questioning the sudden enforcement of rules that hadn't existed months earlier. Several other homeowners began to nod in agreement, some even standing up to share their own experiences with questionable violation notices. Karen's face flushed red as she realized I had come prepared, and that her carefully constructed narrative was unraveling. William Porter cleared his throat awkwardly and announced they would review the regulations regarding pre-approved structures. As we left the meeting, several neighbors approached us to express their support quietly. "We've been getting pressured too," whispered Bob Henderson, who had lived in Pinewood Gardens for over a decade. "They're trying to force us out with ridiculous fines for lawn maintenance issues that never existed before." Gradually, we realized we weren't alone. Karen had been systematically targeting anyone who might stand in the way of reaching that 75% threshold for elite homes. The look of hatred Karen shot at us as we gathered with our newfound allies told me this was far from over. What chilled me most wasn't her anger, but the small smile that crept onto her face as she whispered into her phone. I've been in enough military situations to recognize when an enemy is truly dangerous, not when they're shouting, but when they start planning in silence. Walking home, I felt both triumphant and deeply uneasy. We had won this skirmish, but Karen's resources and position of authority gave her advantages we couldn't match. Back home, with Lily safely asleep, Megan and I sat at our kitchen table planning our next steps. "They're not going to stop," Megan said, her tactical mind already mapping out scenarios. "Karen has too much at stake with this elite homes deal." I nodded, feeling both nervous and strangely energized. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the tech guy in the background. I was actively defending my family. We reached out to Margaret for all HOA meeting minutes from the past 3 years, looking for evidence of Karen's abuse of power. "We need to be ready for anything," Megan said, her military training evident in how methodically she assessed potential threats. "Karen's the type who escalates when challenged. She's not going to back down after being publicly confronted." She was right, of course. People with fragile egos and power complexes rarely accept defeat gracefully. What we didn't know then was that Karen had already initiated what she called Plan, a scheme that would end up breaking at least 5 different laws. The following week was tense but productive. Lily, using her remarkable tech skills, discovered the financial connection between Karen, Sophia, and Elite Homes. "Dad, look at this," she said one evening, showing me emails she'd recovered from a public records request. "Karen gets a 6-figure consulting fee for every 10 homes that sell to Elite, and Sophia gets exclusive listing rights on all property." I was both proud of my daughter's investigative skills and disturbed by the depth of corruption we were uncovering. Meanwhile, Megan spotted Scott and 2 other men surveilling our house late at night and quietly increased security around our property. The deeper we dug, the more complex Karen's scheme appeared. Frank discovered that Karen had a history of similar tactics in 2 other communities before moving to Pinewood Gardens. In both cases, she had risen to a position of authority in the HOA, pushed out existing residents through aggressive enforcement of newly created rules, and facilitated property sales to development companies. She had never been charged with anything, carefully keeping her actions just within legal boundaries, but the pattern was undeniable. What made this situation different, however, was that Karen had become sloppy, perhaps emboldened by past successes. She had left more evidence this time: altered HOA documents, misappropriated funds for personal expenses, unauthorized surveillance of residents. We were compiling a case that could potentially result in real legal consequences for her, but we needed to be careful about how we proceeded. Going to the authorities too soon without irrefutable evidence might only serve to warn Karen and give her time to cover her tracks. With mounting evidence in hand, I decided to confront Sophia directly. I knew from Lily's research that she frequented a local coffee shop for client meetings, so I arranged to accidentally run into her there. As I approached her table, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, the fear rising as I prepared to confront someone who was part of the power structure threatening my family. But I forced myself to continue. "Sophia," I said, sliding into the chair across from her, "I think we need to talk about Elite Homes and your arrangement with Karen." Her carefully maintained smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Ryan, I have no idea what you're talking about," she replied coolly, but her eyes darted nervously to her phone. I laid out what we knew: the kickback scheme, the illegal HOA regulation changes, the targeted harassment. "You're making serious accusations without proof," she said dismissively, but I could see I had rattled her. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Look, this doesn't have to be so difficult. Elite Homes is prepared to offer you 20% above market value for your property. You and your family could move somewhere more suitable for your activities. Everyone wins." The offer was tempting, a clean escape from this escalating conflict. For a moment, I found myself considering it, wondering if continuing this fight was worth putting my family through more stress. Just then, Megan appeared, having been watching from a distance. She must have sensed my wavering because she placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder as she sat down. "We're not selling," she stated firmly. "And if we find any more of Karen's people photographing our property or tampering with our security system, we'll be filing police reports." As we left, Megan squeezed my hand, but I could see worry in her eyes, not for herself but for Lily and me. Later that night, she confessed, "Ryan, I've faced down terrorists who were less concerning than Karen, not because she's dangerous herself, but because she's desperate and unpredictable, and she's targeting our home, our daughter's safety." It was the first time I'd seen genuine fear from my warrior wife, and it both terrified and strengthened me. We gathered at Frank's house the next evening to consolidate our findings. Allison Wright, a lawyer friend of Megan's from her self-defense class, joined us to provide legal perspective. Steve Bennett, a former SEAL who had trained with Megan and happened to be in town for a refresher course, also attended. As we spread our evidence across Frank's dining room table, the full picture of Karen's operation came into focus. "This isn't just about HOA overreach anymore," Allison said, reviewing the documents. "We're looking at fraud, misappropriation of funds, conspiracy, and potentially blackmail. These are criminal offenses." Lily had been analyzing financial records she found through public databases. "Dad," she said, her voice excited, "I think I found something big. Karen has been using HOA funds for personal expenses for years. Look at these transfers to an account called Property Maintenance Solutions. It's registered to Scott Mitchell, but the money flows right back to Karen through another account." This was the smoking gun we needed, clear evidence of financial misconduct that couldn't be explained away as simple administrative errors or misunderstandings. Margaret arrived with a cardboard box full of HOA meeting minutes, regulation amendments, and correspondence spanning the last 3 years. "I save everything," she said with a hint of pride. "Karen always dismissed me as a forgetful old woman, so she was careless around me. She didn't realize I was documenting everything." Her meticulous records showed a clear pattern of Karen bypassing proper voting procedures, altering minutes after meetings, and selectively enforcing rules against certain homeowners while ignoring violations by those who supported her. Our next break came when Lily and I discovered Karen had been using HOA funds for personal expenses and had modified numerous regulations without proper votes. Meanwhile, Frank had been helping us document the surveillance activities around our home. With a comprehensive dossier of evidence, we developed a plan to present everything at the next HOA meeting and demand Karen's removal. Frank suggested we also prepare a backup plan, anticipating that Karen might try to prevent such a public exposure. People like Karen don't go down without a fight, he warned. Be ready for her to escalate. Frank's warning proved prescient, though none of us anticipated just how far Karen would go. We were prepared for a legal battle, but Karen had no intention of letting things progress that far. On Saturday morning at 5:45, loud pounding on our front door jolted us awake. Through our security monitor, I saw 3 men in what appeared to be police uniforms standing on our porch, one of them holding up what looked like an official document. My heart nearly stopped when I saw Lily's terrified face as she ran into our bedroom. "Dad, there are cops at the door," she whispered, her voice trembling. But something didn't feel right. I zoomed in on the security feed and noticed inconsistencies in their uniforms. The badges were similar to local police but subtly wrong, and their posture lacked the trained stance of real officers. "Those aren't real police," Megan said, already moving with military precision. She activated what she called Defense Protocol Delta, alerting the SEAL team that had arrived early for their morning training session in our backyard while simultaneously sending a silent alarm to Frank. "Ryan, keep them talking at the door," she instructed. "Don't let them in, but don't antagonize them. We need time." I nodded, my heart pounding as I headed to the front door, feeling simultaneously terrified and determined to protect my family. I opened the door but kept the security chain engaged, coming face to face with Scott Mitchell and 2 other men in convincing but fake police uniforms. "Mr. Taylor," Scott announced with exaggerated authority, "we have an emergency eviction notice issued by the county due to multiple code violations and illegal activities. You and your family have 60 minutes to vacate the premises." He thrust a document toward the gap in the door, official looking at first glance, but I knew county paperwork when I saw it. Taking the paper while keeping the chain on the door, I examined it carefully, stalling for time as Megan had instructed. The document was impressively detailed, printed on what appeared to be county letterhead, complete with an official-looking seal and signatures. But having worked with government systems for years, I immediately spotted several inconsistencies. The formatting was slightly off, the case number format didn't match county conventions, and most tellingly, it cited Judge Williams. No such judge existed in our county. I needed to keep them talking while Megan implemented our defense plan, so I asked questions I already knew the answers to, feigning confusion and concern. "I'd like to see some identification, please," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "And I'll need to call the precinct to verify this order." Scott's face hardened. "There's nothing to verify. This order comes directly from Judge Williams due to immediate safety concerns." I knew then with absolute certainty this was a scam. There was no Judge Williams in our county court system. "This document has several irregularities," I pointed out. "The county seal is outdated, there's no case number, and this signature doesn't match any judge in this jurisdiction." Scott's face flushed with anger as he realized I wasn't as easily intimidated as they had hoped. Behind me, I could hear Lily on the phone, her voice low and urgent, presumably updating Frank or Allison about what was happening. Through the kitchen window, I caught glimpses of movement in our backyard, the SEAL team repositioning themselves according to whatever instructions Megan had given them. I felt a strange calm descend over me despite the tension of the moment. We had prepared for something like this, and now our preparations were being put to the test. "Listen, computer geek," Scott growled, stepping closer to the door. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. You've got 60 minutes, or we're coming in and removing you physically." I felt myself instinctively step back, years of avoiding confrontation kicking in. For a moment, I was that shy id specialist again, the one who needed others to fight his battles. But then I thought of Lily watching, of Megan counting on me to buy time. I straightened my spine and stood my ground. "What you're doing is impersonating law enforcement officers. A federal offense," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I suggest you leave my property immediately." Scott's face contorted with rage. He nodded to his companions, and they began to push against the door. The security chain strained against the force, and I braced myself against the door, knowing it wouldn't hold for long against 3 determined men. I could feel the wood beginning to splinter, and for a terrifying moment, I thought they would break through before help arrived. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, phone in hand, her face pale with fear. "Lily, stay back," I shouted, pushing with all my strength against the door. Just as the chain began to give way, a loud, authoritative voice rang out from behind them. "Federal agents, hands where we can see them." The fake officers whirled around to find themselves surrounded by Megan and 4 members of the SEAL team she had been training, all in tactical gear. At the same moment, several real police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing, responding to Frank's call. The look of shock on Scott's face was almost comical as he realized he had walked into a trap. What he and Karen hadn't counted on was that our security cameras had recorded everything. Lily had been live streaming the entire confrontation to Allison and Frank, and we had a team of Navy SEALs in our backyard. The transition from aggressors to cornered rats was instantaneous. Scott's bravado evaporated, replaced by panic as he realized the severity of what he had just done. Impersonating law enforcement officers was a federal offense that carried significant jail time. As the real police officers approached, Scott and his accomplices tried to flee but were quickly apprehended. Megan stood among the SEAL team, her expression cold but with fury simmering beneath the surface as she watched me pick myself up after being pushed. Within minutes, Scott and his cronies were in handcuffs, charged with impersonating law enforcement officers and attempted breaking and entering. As they were led to the police cars, I spotted a familiar Mercedes driving slowly past our house. Karen, her face ashen as she saw the police activity. Our security cameras caught the moment she had dropped Scott and the fake officers near our house 20 minutes earlier. She sped away, but it was too late. We had her on video, and Scott, facing serious charges, was already offering to testify against Karen in exchange for leniency. The real police officers, initially confused by the presence of the SEAL team in our backyard, quickly understood the situation once we explained Megan's profession and showed them our security footage. One officer, a former military man himself, shook his head in disbelief. In 15 years on the force, I've never seen an HOA dispute escalate to fake police officers. This Karen character must be desperate. He was right. Karen had crossed a line from harassment and intimidation into outright criminal activity, and there would be no going back. As the police finished taking our statements and collecting evidence, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Word spread quickly about what had happened, and soon our front yard was filled with concerned residents wanting to know if we were okay and what exactly had transpired. The community that Karen had worked so hard to divide was coming together in the face of her shocking action. Even those who had previously kept their distance now approached us with expressions of support and outrage. When the police had gone and things calmed down, I held a trembling Lily close while Megan watched vigilantly out the window. "Is it over?" Lily asked, her voice small. I shared a look with Megan, both of us knowing better. "No, sweetheart," I said gently, "but we've won this round, and we're ready for whatever comes next." That afternoon, we filed a formal complaint against Karen and the HOA with the help of Allison, citing harassment, conspiracy, and attempted illegal eviction. News of the fake police raid spread quickly through the neighborhood, and many residents who had been intimidated by Karen in the past began to come forward with their own stories. The aftermath of the fake raid transformed our standing in the community overnight. Where we had once been viewed with suspicion by some neighbors due to Karen's smear campaign, we were now seen as victims of corrupt leadership. More importantly, people began to connect their own negative experiences with the HOA to the larger pattern we had uncovered. The floodgates opened as residents shared stories of arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, and pressure to sell their homes. What had begun as our private battle was evolving into a community-wide movement for accountability. Karen tried to spin the situation, claiming she had merely hired legal representatives to speak with us and had no idea they would impersonate police officers. Few believed her. Sophia and William quickly distanced themselves, insisting they had no knowledge of Plan B. Margaret provided us with documents proving Karen had altered HOA regulations without proper votes, and Megan organized a neighborhood watch system to protect against any retaliation. The community was rallying around us, but I knew Karen was far from finished. A cornered predator is most dangerous when it has nothing left to lose. We called an informal neighborhood meeting to share all our evidence about Karen's corruption and her deal with Elite Homes. Standing before my neighbors, I initially felt awkward and uncertain. Public speaking had never been my forte, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead as dozens of eyes focused on me. But then I caught Lily watching me with admiration, and something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about our home anymore. It was about standing up against bullies and showing my daughter what courage looked like. My voice grew stronger as I laid out the evidence, and by the end, nearly everyone in attendance was calling for a vote of no confidence in the HOA leadership. That evening, as we celebrated our small victory, Megan caught a flashlight beam sweeping across Lily's bedroom window, instantly putting her on high alert. Hours later, we received an anonymous email. "You think you've won, but I have other cards to play. This is war." Attached was a photo of Lily walking home from school. As I opened the image, my hands trembled, not with fear, but with rage. Megan looked over my shoulder, and I saw something rare flash across her face. Pure, unfiltered fear. Karen had crossed the final line. This was no longer about HOA regulations. This was about our daughter's safety. The photo of Lily changed everything. We immediately upgraded our security protocols, arranged for Lily to have escorts to and from school, and filed another police report. The officer who took our report looked grave when we showed him the email. "This is clearly a threat against a minor," he said. "We're taking this very seriously." He advised us to keep detailed records of any further communication and to consider a restraining order against Karen. Though without definitive proof that she had sent the email, our options were limited. Meanwhile, Karen's world was beginning to crumble. Elite Homes, sensing the growing scandal, pulled out of their deal with her. Without the prospect of lucrative kickbacks, Karen's grand scheme was collapsing. Yet her vendetta against us seemed to intensify rather than diminish. Sophie approached us, offering to testify against Karen to minimize her own involvement. "She's lost it," she told us, her carefully maintained facade cracking. "She's threatening to release personal information on everyone in the neighborhood if she loses her position. She's been using HOA funds to hire private investigators to follow multiple families, not just yours." According to Sophia, Karen had compiled dossiers on many residents, looking for leverage she could use if they opposed him. She had files on financial troubles, marital issues, even medical conditions, all obtained through questionable means. She's been accessing people's mail, hacking email accounts, and using Scott to conduct surveillance. This explained why so many neighbors had been reluctant to cross Karen. She had dirt on them and wasn't afraid to use it. I felt a renewed wave of anger at how this woman had terrorized our community under the guise of maintaining property values. Karen's behavior became more erratic and dangerous. At the next official HOA meeting, which she was forced to call due to community pressure, she appeared disheveled and combative. When confronted with evidence of her misdeeds, she lashed out, threatening to publish a doctored video claiming Megan had violated national security protocols during her training sessions. "I have footage of classified techniques being taught to unauthorized personnel," she declared. "One call to Homeland Security and your wife's career is over. We'd expected something like this and were prepared." While Karen had been busy monitoring our security cameras, I had installed software that tracked all her computer activities once she accessed our system. A trick I'd learned during my military days. When I mentioned this capability during the meeting, Karen's face paled momentarily before she recovered with a dismissive laugh. "You're bluffing," she said, but the uncertainty in her eyes told me she was worried. She should have been. We had captured evidence of her using AI software to create deep fake videos, along with emails discussing how to use them for blackmail. The meeting ended with a formal vote to remove Karen from her position as HOA president, but she refused to recognize the results, claiming procedural irregularities, the very tactic she had used against others, now deployed in her own defense. As she stormed out, she turned back with a venomous glare. "This isn't over," she spat. "Not by a long shot." I believed her. Women like Karen didn't accept defeat gracefully, especially such a public humiliation. We needed to remain vigilant. That night, As Megan and I discussed our next steps, Lily was working on her computer in the living room. "Dad, Mom," she called suddenly, her voice urgent. "Karen's deleting files from the HOA server right now. I'm logged in remotely, and I can see her erasing financial records and meeting minutes." This was the digital equivalent of destroying evidence, and we needed to stop it immediately. I called Frank, who contacted a detective he knew in the financial crimes unit. Within an hour, the police had a warrant to secure the HOA computers and prevent further tampering. Meanwhile, Steve and some of his SEAL teammates had volunteered to conduct surveillance on Karen, concerned about her increasingly unstable behavior. What they discovered was alarming. Karen was meeting secretly with William Porter to discuss moving money from the HOA accounts to personal offshore holdings before officially resigning. "She's planning to flee," Steve reported after overhearing one of their conversations. "They're talking about substantial sums already transferred and finalizing the exit strategy by the end of the week." We were running out of time. If Karen managed to transfer the HOA funds and leave the country, the neighborhood would suffer a devastating financial blow, and she might escape justice entirely. We needed to catch her in the act of embezzlement, the one crime that would be impossible to explain away as a misunderstanding or zealous enforcement of HOA rules. With Frank's help, we devised a plan to set up surveillance at the HOA office and document any illegal financial transactions. Allison helped us obtain an emergency injunction freezing the HOA accounts based on the evidence we'd already gathered, but we needed more to ensure criminal charges would stick. The plan was set. Ryan, Megan, Allison, and Frank would stake out the HOA office the following night when William had scheduled a special financial review that we suspected was cover for the final transfers. We had positioned hidden cameras and microphones throughout the office earlier that day under the pretense of performing routine maintenance. That night, as we finalized our preparations, Lily ran to us with a pale face and her phone in hand. "Mom, Dad," she said, showing us a message from an unknown number. "Your parents are in grave danger. I know Karen's plan. Tell them not to go to the HOA office tonight." The warning took us by surprise. Who could be trying to help us? After careful consideration, we decided to proceed with our plan, but with additional precautions, including alerting local police to have a patrol unit nearby. That night, we set up our stakeout at the HOA office with Frank, Allison, and Steve positioned strategically. To our surprise, we found the office empty. Karen had apparently been tipped off about our plan. Then William Porter, the HOA lawyer, appeared unexpectedly. "I sent the warning to your daughter," he admitted, looking uncomfortable. "I've been helping Karen with legal matters, but I never agreed to anything illegal. She's planning to ambush your home while you're here, to steal evidence, and possibly threaten your daughter." I felt a cold dread wash over me at his words, but Megan was already moving, calling Frank, who was stationed near our house, as a precaution. Frank confirmed he had spotted an unfamiliar vehicle parked near our home and was monitoring the situation. He had moved Lily to a safe location as part of our contingency plan. As we raced home, William revealed more details of Karen's desperate scheme. "She's created a deep fake video of your wife sharing classified information during training sessions. She plans to threaten you with it unless you sell your home and leave the neighborhood." The irony wasn't lost on me. In her attempt to hack our security system, Karen had given me access to monitor her own computer, where I discovered evidence of her using AI software to create the fake video. When we arrived home, we found Karen attempting to break in through our back door, unaware that Frank and several neighbors were watching from hidden positions. The moment she forced the lock and stepped inside, lights flooded the area. "Karen Anderson, you're trespassing." Megan's voice rang out from the darkness. Karen spun around, her face contorted with shock and rage. She pulled out what appeared to be a flash drive. "I have everything I need to destroy you," she snarled. "One email with this video and your precious military career is over." Cornered, Karen revealed her trump card, the manipulated video of Megan. "I'll ruin your career, your reputation, everything." She threatened, her voice unsteady. Megan simply smiled. "That video is an obvious fake," she said calmly. "And my husband has been monitoring your computer activities for weeks. We have evidence of you creating it." Karen's face drained of color as she realized she had been outplayed at every turn. But the biggest surprise came when Frank appeared with someone none of us expected, James Anderson, Karen's estranged son and a police officer. "Mom, this has to stop," James said quietly. "You're about to commit multiple felonies on top of what you've already done." The sight of her son seemed to puncture Karen's rage, revealing the insecurity beneath. "You don't understand," Karen said, her voice suddenly unsteady. "They took everything from me, my job, my dignity, and now the only power I had left." "No one took your dignity but yourself, Mom," James replied softly. "And it's not too late to get it back." The moment hung in the air, heavy with years of estrangement and regret. I could see the internal struggle playing out on Karen's face, the ruthless HOA president warring with a mother who had lost her son's respect. For a moment, I thought she might surrender, might find some redemption in accepting responsibility for her actions. But then her expression hardened, and she made a dash for the door, shoving James aside in her desperation to escape. She didn't get far. Steve and 2 other former SEALs had positioned themselves around the perimeter of our property, anticipating just such an attempt. Karen was quickly subdued, her final act of defiance ending not with a dramatic standoff, but with the pathetic spectacle of a middle-aged woman being held firmly but gently by men who had faced far more dangerous adversaries than a corrupt HOA president. As the police arrived to take Karen into custody, I noticed Margaret standing on the periphery, observing the scene with a mixture of sadness and vindication. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, she said softly when I approached her. "Watched it change, watched people come and go. Karen isn't the first to try to use the HOA as a personal fiefdom, but she's certainly gone the furthest." She handed me a flash drive. "Here's every conversation I've recorded with Karen over the past 3 years. I may look like a forgetful old woman, but I've been documenting her scheme since the beginning." In that moment, I realized that Margaret had been playing the long game all along, appearing non-threatening while gathering evidence that would eventually bring Karen down. Her patience and foresight put my own reactive approach to shame. "You knew what she was from the start, didn't you?" I asked. She nodded. "Women like Karen are predictable. They mistake kindness for weakness and age for irrelevance. Those are costly errors." In that moment, I saw Karen not as the tyrannical HOA president, but as a broken woman whose life had derailed years ago when she lost her finance career in the 2008 crash. She had never recovered professionally, and the HOA presidency had given her a taste of the power and respect she craved. Now, facing her son's disappointment and the collapse of her schemes, something in her finally broke. With a defeated slump of her shoulders, she surrendered. The aftermath unfolded quickly. Karen was arrested for embezzlement, conspiracy to defraud, and multiple other charges. Thanks to her son's intervention, she received a plea deal with the possibility of rehabilitation. Sophia avoided jail time but had to pay restitution to affected families and lost her real estate license. William Porter, despite his initial complicity, received leniency for helping prevent Karen's final plan. Our family was hailed as heroes in the neighborhood, and I was nominated as the new HOA president, a position I declined, suggesting Margaret instead. Megan's backyard training facility was officially recognized as a community asset, where she now offers free self-defense classes for residents. The most significant change, however, was within our family. Through this ordeal, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I was no longer the insecure husband standing in his wife's shadow, but an equal partner who had helped save our home and community. Megan, for her part, allowed herself to be vulnerable about her fears for our family, strengthening our bond. And Lily had watched both her parents stand up against intimidation, learning invaluable lessons about courage and justice. James Anderson began rebuilding his relationship with his mother, creating an opportunity for Karen to learn how to be a better person. As for us, we turned our experience into a YouTube channel sharing homeowners' rights against HOA overreach, helping thousands of other families across America facing similar situations. The community of Pinewood Gardens transformed too, becoming closer and more supportive, with Margaret's fair and transparent leadership replacing Karen's tyranny. So that's how an arrogant HOA president sent fake cops to evict us, not knowing my wife was training real SEAL teams in our backyard. But the biggest lesson I learned wasn't about HOAs or legal rights. It was about myself. Sometimes the greatest challenges aren't about defeating enemies, but discovering strengths you never knew you had. And as you can see, sometimes justice isn't served in courtrooms, but right in your own backyard. Subscribe to see our next story about how we helped a family in Florida defeat a similar HOA, and this one even involved a fake mayor joining the scheme. Epilogue. 6 months later, 6 months after the Karen incident, as our neighborhood now calls it, Pinewood Gardens has transformed into the community it was always meant to be. Under Margaret's leadership, the HOA actually serves the residents rather than ruling over them. The Elite Homes deal is long dead, replaced by community-initiated improvements that have increased property values without pushing out longtime residents. Karen, now in a rehabilitation program as part of her plea agreement, has begun the long process of making amends, starting with community service in the neighborhood she once terrorized. Our lives have changed in ways I never could have anticipated when this all began. Megan's training business is thriving with full community support, and even some neighbors have joined her self-defense classes. Lily has become something of a tech security consultant for the neighborhood, helping seniors protect themselves from online scams. And me, I've discovered I have a knack for community organizing and conflict resolution, skills I never knew I possessed during my years hiding behind computer screens. Perhaps the most unexpected development came last week when we received a letter from Karen. It was simple and straightforward. I'm sorry for what I put your family through. My son is helping me understand the damage I've caused. I have a long way to go, but I wanted you to know I'm trying. Megan and I discussed whether to respond and ultimately decided that acknowledging her efforts toward change was the right thing to do. Redemption is never guaranteed, but it should always be possible. James has kept in touch with us, updating us on his mother's progress. She's different now, James told me during a recent visit. Humbled, of course, but also reflective in a way I haven't seen since before the financial crash cost her her career. She talks about making restitution, not just legally but personally to everyone she'd harmed. I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive Karen for threatening my family, but I can appreciate the journey. Sometimes it takes hitting bottom to begin the climb back to decency. Our YouTube channel now has over 100,000 subscribers, with homeowners across the country reaching out for advice on dealing with HOA overreach. We've helped draft legislation in 3 states to increase HOA transparency and accountability. It turns out that standing up to a bully in our own neighborhood was just the beginning of a much larger mission. What started as a personal fight has evolved into advocacy that helps others protect their homes and communities from those who would abuse positions of power. As for Scott Mitchell and the fake officers, they completed their community service sentences and left town, hopefully having learned valuable lessons about following corrupt leaders. Sophia has moved to another state to restart her real estate career, though the incident will follow her professional reputation for years to come. William Porter now specializes in helping homeowners understand their rights against HOAs, a complete reversal from his previous role. Sometimes those caught in the orbit of corruption can find redemption by using their insider knowledge to prevent similar abuses. The security cameras that once protected us from threats now mainly capture wildlife, neighborhood children playing, and the occasional package delivery. Our home, once targeted for removal, has become a gathering place for community events and planning sessions. The backyard training facility hosts charity events for veterans organizations, turning what Karen once called a neighborhood menace into a valued community resource. Sometimes I look back at the man I was before this all began, the conflict-avoidant tech guy who doubted his ability to protect his family and barely recognize him. Standing up against injustice changed me in ways I never expected, awakening a confidence and purpose that had been dormant for years. Megan says she always saw this version of me waiting to emerge, but I needed the right catalyst to find it myself. The most important outcome, though, is what Lily learned through all this, not that power corrupts or that justice prevails, though those are valuable lessons, but that ordinary people can stand up to intimidation when they work together. She watched her father transform from hesitant to heroic, her mother reveal vulnerability behind strength, and a community unite against corruption. These are lessons no classroom could ever teach. So if you're facing your own Karen Hoffman, remember our story. Document everything. Know your rights. Build alliances. And most importantly, recognize that inside every conflict-avoidant ordinary person might be a fighter just waiting for the right moment to emerge. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won by those born brave, but by those who find their courage when it matters most. And if you're an HOA president watching this, wondering if your residents might one day rise up against you, well, maybe that's exactly the kind of self-reflection you need. Power isn't about control. It's about service. Karen learned that the hard way.